Today, Alexander Alexandrovich Kolesnikov shares his story, the son of the 50th Tank Regiment of the 11th Tank Corps. At the age of 12, he found himself on the front lines, serving as a scout and tank crew member, participating in battles near Minsk, on the Vistula River, and at the Seelow Heights. He was severely wounded, but returned to duty time and again. For his courage and bravery, he was awarded the Order of Glory, 3rd class. In March 1943, my friend and I skipped school and headed to the front. We managed to sneak onto a freight train, hiding in a wagon filled with compressed hay. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, but at one of the stations, we were discovered and sent back to Moscow. On the way back, I escaped again to the front, to find my father, who was serving as the deputy commander of a mechanized corps. I traveled far and wide, walking countless roads and hitching rides on passing vehicles. Once, in Nezhin, I ran into a wounded tank crewman from my father's unit. It turned out that my dad had received a letter from my mom about my heroic escapade and promised to give me a proper thrashing when we met. That news changed my plans significantly. Without thinking too long, I joined a group of tank crewmen heading to the rear for reorganization. I told them my father was a tank crewman too, that I'd lost my mother during the evacuation, and that I was all alone. They believed me and took me in as the son of the regiment in the 50th Tank Regiment of the 11th Tank Corps. That's how, at 12 years old, I became a soldier. I went on reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines twice, and both times I completed the task. Although, the first time, I nearly gave away our radio man, whom I was bringing a new set of batteries for his radio. The rendezvous was set at a cemetery. The signal was a duck's quack. I reached the cemetery at night, and the scene was horrifying. All the graves were torn apart by shelling. Probably more out of fear than necessity, I started quacking. I quacked so enthusiastically that I didn't notice our radio man crawling up behind me. He clamped his hand over my mouth and whispered, "Have you lost your mind, kid? Whoever heard of ducks quacking at night? They sleep at night." Still, the mission was a success. After those successful trips behind enemy lines, they started calling me San Sanich with respect. In June 1944, the 1st Belarusian Front began preparing for an offensive. I was summoned to the Corps' reconnaissance department and introduced to a pilot lieutenant colonel. The air ace looked at me with great skepticism. The head of reconnaissance caught his glance and assured him that San Sanich could be trusted, that I was already a seasoned sparrow. The pilot lieutenant colonel was brief. The Germans near Minsk were preparing a powerful defensive barrier. They were continuously moving equipment to the front by rail. The unloading was happening somewhere in a forest, on a camouflage railway branch, about 60-70 kilometers from the front line. This branch needed to be destroyed, but it wasn't simple. Paratrooper scouts sent on the mission hadn't returned. Aerial reconnaissance couldn't locate the branch either. It was perfectly camouflaged. My task was to find this secret railway branch within 3 days and mark its location by hanging old bed linens on trees. They dressed me in civilian clothes and gave me a bundle of bed linens. I looked like a homeless teenager trading linens for food. I crossed the front line at night with a group of scouts. They had their own mission, and we soon parted ways. I made my way through the forest following the main railway. Every 300-400 meters, there were paired German patrols. Exhausted, I dozed off during the day and nearly got caught. I woke up to a hard kick. 2 policemen searched me and rummaged through my bundle of linens. They took a few potatoes, a piece of bread, and some lard I had. They also grabbed a couple of pillowcases and towels with Belarusian embroidery. As a parting gift, they said, "Get lost before we shoot you." That's how I got off. Luckily, the policemen didn't turn my pockets inside out. If they had, it would have been trouble. Sewn into the lining of my jacket pocket was a topographic map showing the locations of railway stations. On the 3rd day, I stumbled across the bodies of the paratrooper scouts the pilot lieutenant colonel had mentioned. Soon, my path was blocked by barbed wire, a restricted zone. I crept along the wire for several kilometers until I reached the main railway line. Luck was on my side. A military train loaded with tanks slowly veered off the main track and disappeared into the trees. There it was, the mysterious branch. The Germans had camouflaged it perfectly. Even more cleverly, the train was moving tail first. The locomotive was at the rear of the train, creating the illusion that the smoke was coming from the main line. At night, I climbed to the top of a tree growing at the junction of the branch and the main railway and hung up the first sheet. By dawn, I had hung linens in 3 more spots. For the final marker, I used my own shirt, tying it by the sleeves. It fluttered in the wind like a flag. I stayed in the tree until morning. It was terrifying, but I was most afraid of falling asleep and missing the reconnaissance plane. The Lavochkin 5 appeared on time. The Germans didn't shoot at it to avoid giving themselves away. The plane circled at a distance, then flew over me, turned toward the front, and waggled its wings, a prearranged signal. "The branch has been spotted. Get out. We're going to bomb it." I untied my shirt and climbed down. After walking just a couple of kilometers, I heard the rumble of our bombers, and soon explosions erupted where the secret branch was. The echo of that bombardment followed me through the first day of my journey back to the front line. The next day, I reached the Seelow River. There were no makeshift rafts to cross it, and on the opposite bank, I could see an enemy guard post. About a kilometer to the north, there was an old wooden bridge with a single railway track. I decided to cross it by hitching a ride on a German train, clinging to a brake platform, as I'd done before. There were sentries on the bridge and along the railway. I decided to try my luck at a siding where trains stopped to let others pass. I crawled, hiding behind bushes, snacking on wild strawberries along the way. Suddenly, right in front of me, a boot. I thought it was a German. I started crawling backward, but then I heard a hushed report. "Another train's coming through, Comrade Captain." Relief washed over me. I tugged at the captain's boot, startling him badly. We recognized each other. We crossed the front line together. From their haggard faces, I could tell the scouts had been at the bridge for days, but couldn't find a way to destroy the crossing. The approaching train was unusual. Sealed wagons guarded by SS troops. It had to be carrying ammunition. The train stopped to let a hospital train pass in the opposite direction. The SS guards from the ammunition train crossed to the other side to check for familiar faces among the wounded. Then it hit me. I grabbed the explosives from a soldier's hands and, without waiting for permission, dashed to the embankment. I slid under a wagon, struck a match, but then the wagon's wheels started moving, and an SS soldier's polished boot dangled from the step. There was no way to crawl out from under the wagon. What could I do? I opened the coal box, doghouse on the move, and climbed inside with the explosives. As the wheels clattered over the bridge's deck, I struck another match and lit the Bickford fuse. Seconds remained until the explosion. I stared at the burning fuse, thinking it would tear me to pieces. I leaped out of the coal box, slipped between the sentries, and dove off the bridge into the water. I swam downstream, diving repeatedly. Shots from the bridge's sentries mixed with bursts from the train's SS guards. Then my explosives detonated. The ammunition wagons exploded one after another, like a chain reaction. A fiery whirlwind consumed the bridge, the train, and its guards. No matter how hard I tried to swim away, a German guard boat caught up with me and picked me up. By the time it reached the shore near the guard post, I'd already passed out from the beatings. The enraged Germans crucified me. They nailed my hands and feet to the wall by the entrance. Our scouts saved me. They saw that I'd survived the explosion, but had been captured. They launched a sudden attack on the guard post and rescued me from the Germans. I came to under the stove of a burned-out Belarusian village. I learned that the scouts had taken me down from the wall, wrapped me in a tarpaulin, and carried me toward the front line. On the way, they ran into an enemy ambush. Many died in the brief firefight. A wounded sergeant picked me up and carried me out of that hell. He hid me, left me his submachine gun, and went to fetch water to treat my wounds. He never returned. I don't know how long I stayed in that hiding spot. I kept losing consciousness, coming to, and slipping back into oblivion. Suddenly, I heard tanks approaching. By the sound, they were ours. I shouted, but with the roar of the tracks, no one heard me. From the strain, I passed out again. When I came to, I heard Russian speech. But what if it was policemen? Only after making sure they were our troops did I call for help. They pulled me out from under the stove and sent me straight to a field medical unit. Then came a frontline hospital, a hospital train, and finally a hospital in far-off Novosibirsk. I spent nearly 5 months there. Still not fully recovered, I escaped with some discharged tank crewmen, convincing an elderly nurse to bring me some old clothes so I could take a walk in the city. I caught up with my regiment in Poland near Warsaw. They assigned me to a tank crew. During the crossing of the Vistula, our crew took an icy plunge. A shell hit the ferry, rocking it hard, and our T-34 sank to the bottom. Despite the crew's efforts, the turret hatch wouldn't open under the water's pressure. The water slowly filled the tank, soon reaching my neck. Finally, they managed to open the hatch. The guys pushed me to the surface first. Then they took turns diving into the freezing water to hook a cable to the tank's tow hooks. Two linked T-34s barely managed to pull the sunken tank out. During this ordeal on the ferry, I ran into the pilot lieutenant colonel who had sent me to find the secret railway branch. He was overjoyed. "I've been looking for you for 6 months. I gave my word. If you were alive, I'd find you." The tank crew let me go to the air regiment for a day. I met the pilots who had bombed that secret branch. They showered me with chocolate and took me for a ride in a U-2. Then the entire air regiment lined up, and I was solemnly awarded the Order of Glory 3rd Class. On April 16, 1945, at the Seelow Heights, I managed to knock out a German Tiger tank. At a crossroads, our tanks met head-on. I was the gunner, fired first with a sub-caliber round, and hit the Tiger under its turret. The massive armored cap flew off like a light ball. That same day, our tank was hit. Fortunately, the entire crew survived. We switched to another tank and continued fighting. Of that second tank, only 3 of us survived. By April 29th, I was in my 5th tank. I was the only one rescued from its crew. A Faust patron hit the engine compartment of our vehicle. I was at the gunner's station. The driver mechanic grabbed my legs and threw me out through the front hatch. He started climbing out himself but ran out of time. The ammunition started exploding and he perished. I woke up in a hospital on May 8th. The hospital was in Karlshorst, opposite the building where the German surrender was signed. No one will ever forget that day. The wounded ignored doctors, nurses, and their own injuries. They jumped, danced, and hugged each other. They laid me on a sheet and carried me to the window to show me Marshal Zhukov leaving after the signing of the surrender. Later, they brought out Keitel and his dejected entourage. I returned to Moscow in the summer of 1945. I hesitated for a long time before entering our house on Begovaya Street. I hadn't written to my mother for over 2 years, afraid she'd pull me from the front. I was terrified of this meeting with her, knowing how much grief I'd caused her. I slipped in quietly as I'd been taught in reconnaissance. But a mother's intuition is sharper. She turned abruptly, raised her head, and stared at me for a long, long time, looking at my uniform, my medals. "Do you smoke?" she finally asked. "Yep," I lied, trying to hide my embarrassment and hold back tears. Many years later, I visited the place where the bridge had been blown up. I found the guard post by the riverbank. It was in ruins. I walked around, looked at the new bridge. Nothing reminded me of the terrible tragedy that had unfolded here during the war. And yet I felt deeply, deeply sad.